Now, the next thing is multi-level queue scheduling. That is, we have seen about various aspects of scheduling algorithm. We have seen about the first come, first serve, as a priority, and then round robin. Here we will discuss about the multi-level queue scheduling. We want the process to be classified into separate groups. That is, there may be some interactive, that is, those processes in which you are interacting. There may be some processes which are background. So what happens? The ready queue, now this ready queue is partitioned into several separate queues. In fact, the ready queue is again partitioned into separate queues now. So the processes are permanently assigned to these queues. Like the interactive, say they will be assigned here, and those batch will be assigned here likewise. So they are permanently assigned to one queue, and based on the property like say memory requirement, say process priority or process type. And now each queue, each partition, or you can say each resulting queue has its own scheduling algorithm. So there must be also scheduling among the queue, because now we have different queues. Say I have separate queue. First of all, I want and we want to have some scheduling in this queue, and then since there are a number of queues also, we now want scheduling between them as well. And this is simply fixed priority preemptive scheduling. Mostly it is the queuing or scheduling among the various partitions or queues. They are done by fixed priority preemptive scheduling. So fixed priority scheduling, what it does, it will serve from foreground, then background. Means first it will cater to the foreground processes which you are interacting with, and then we go to the background process. So there must be and there should be some possibility of starvation. We know some processes may not get the chance, so they will get starved. We have time slice queues. It gets a certain amount of CPU time which it can be scheduled amongst its processes, say 80% to foreground in round robin, this can be given, and 20% to background in first come first serve, this can be given. So the priority, as we said, between the queues, which processes shall be catered first? System processes, then we come to interactive processes, and then to interactive editing processes, then batch processes, and the lowest priority goes to the student processes. Then we have another you can say a variation or a taste of this type of scheduling, which is called multi-level feedback queue scheduling. Now here what happens, we just saw that we can have different queues, and these queues will have another scheduling, one more scheduling, and the processes among the inside this queue will have some scheduling. Now multi-level feedback queue scheduling means now the process can move between the queues. Previously the system processes cannot move to the student processes, where the student processes are there. They are taken or they are dealt separately, but here the processes can move between queues. And now process with different CPU characteristics, they are now separated. And if the process is using too much of CPU time, it will be left or it will be pushed to a lower priority queue, because it is taking too much time. It will make others starve. So if a process waits too long, if a process is starving by the way in a lower priority queue, then it will be moved to the, say the student process is there, and it is starving, it is waiting. So it will be moved to the higher priority, say the system processes queue. That is, we know that aging would prevent the starvation. So in general, what happens in multi-level feedback queue scheduler, and if this multi-level feedback queue scheduler, we need to define it, then what parameters we would require. First, how much or how many numbers of queues we would have. Then for each queue, what scheduling algorithm you are going to employ, and how to upgrade the process to the higher priority queue, and what is the process or what will be the criteria to demote certain process to the lower priority queue, and also the methods which we use to determine which queue a process will enter when the process actually needs this service, right? We have certain example of multi-level feedback queue. For example, we have three queues, three different queues. Say this is one queue, this is another queue, this is third queue. So this is Q0. This is implemented with round robin, and the quantum of time is 8 millisecond. In this Q2, this is Q1, this is Q2. Q2 we have round robin. Now here that quantum time is 16 millisecond. Here it was 8 millisecond. And then this one Q3, this is simply first come first serve. First come first serve. So what will happen? Let us see the scheduling. A new job is going to enter. The new job enters Q0, which is served first come first serve. Now, when it gains the control of the CPU, it will only get 8 millisecond. If it finishes in 8 seconds, it is very good. Our task will be simplified. Otherwise, if it doesn't end, this process doesn't end in 8 millisecond, then this job will be moved to the Q2. This process or job will be moved to Q2. At Q1, job is again served FCFS, and it will receive 16 millisecond of CPU burst. If it completes, again our job will be not very complex. But if it doesn't complete in 16 millisecond, it will again be preempted after 16 seconds, and it will be sent to the Q2, that is the third queue. So in multi-level feedback queue, as I just suggested, first the process will come. It will be first come first serve basis treated. It will be given a chance to execute for 8 milliseconds. If it completes, it's okay. Otherwise, it will be sent to the second queue. This was Q0, this is Q1, this is Q2. Now, if it completes, okay. Then if it doesn't complete in 8 milliseconds, it will be sent to Q2. Again, it will be given a chance to complete for 16 milliseconds in first come first serve basis. If it doesn't complete, then it will be sent to FCFS. If it completes, okay, it will be terminated. But if it doesn't complete, it will be sent back in the FCFS manner. So whosoever has first come, it will be given, and this will remain in the tail, and eventually it will get its chance. Then we have thread scheduling. So thread also needs scheduling. So on operating system that support this thread scheduling, it is kernel level threads, not processes that are being scheduled by the operating system. Operating system schedules the kernel level threads. So we have local scheduling, global scheduling. In local scheduling, how the thread library decides which thread to move onto an available lightweight process. In global scheduling, how the kernel decides which kernel thread to run next. I hope you got the idea. Local scheduling, the thread library decides. Global scheduling, the kernel decides. Contention scope, we have process contention scope and system contention scope. In the process contention scope, on systems implementing many-to-one and many-to-many model. Many-to-many models, the thread library schedules the user level threads. These are user level threads to run on available lightweight process. And in system contention scope, the process of deciding this is the process of deciding the kernel thread to schedule on the CPU. This is system contention scope, and this is process contention scope when we are talking about the thread scheduling. For example, p-thread scheduling. This is a sample of thread creation with p-threads. So previously also we saw this is a p-thread. We create number of threads, we get some default attributes, and we'll see which scope is there. Contention scope is process scope or system scope. So we'll decide which one is this, we'll find out, and accordingly, if we don't get the scheduling scope, we'll stop. Otherwise, if it is PT thread, this is process scope, we do certain thing. If it is system scope, we do certain things. Then we set the scheduling algorithm to this process contention scope or system contention scope. This is setting of scope. Then we create a thread and we join each thread, and each thread will begin control in this function, and we do some running work, and then the thread will exit. Multiple process scheduling. When we have multiple CPUs or multiple cores, then the CPU scheduling becomes quite complicated. If we have homogeneous processor within a multiprocessor, that is typically each processor maintains its own private queue of process or threads, you can say, and all of which are ready or available to run. So in the multiple processor scheduling, we need the load sharing. So as we just talked about in the earlier discussions, asymmetric multiprocessor processing, only one processor accesses the system data structure. This is system data structure, and this will elevate the need for data sharing also. And what are the approaches we apply in this multiple process scheduling? We assume or anticipate the homogeneous processor, which we just saw that they are very identical in the functionality, and the memory access, that is, we want the memory access to be uniform. We assume homogeneous processors and uniform memory access, we assume that. If we have several similar or identical processes which are available to us, then the load sharing can be there with a common ready queue. So processes in the queue, they are scheduled to any available process or available processor. So we have one of the two scheduling approaches that we can employ, that each processor is self-scheduling, that it will, the CPU or you can say processor, it selects a process from a common ready queue to execute. Common ready queue is there. And one more scheduling approach is one processor is appointed as a scheduler for the other process. Means one processor is there are number of processes, one will be assigned to take care of the scheduling process. So this becomes the master and this becomes the slave. So this master will take the process from the queue and it will assign it to several different processors. So some systems, this, as I just said, they carry the master slave structure. They further enhance by having all these scheduling decisions, the input output processing, and there are other system activities handled by one single processor, that is the master server, that gives or that takes the process and give it to the other processors. So this asymmetric multiprocessing is somewhat simpler than the SMP or symmetric multiprocessing, since only one processor accesses the system data structure, not all of them. Again, this is elevating the need for data sharing. Not very efficient because the input output processes may pose some bottleneck on one CPU, this one, the master one, that is performing all the operation. So what happens here is typically what is done in an operating system, asymmetric multiprocessing is implemented first within the OS, and then it is upgraded to symmetric as the system evolves. Processor affinity. we have soft affinity, hard affinity. What is this processor affinity? This is the migration of a process to another process. This migration of process to another process, this is avoided since or because of the cost of invalidating the process and repopulating the processor cache. So we can have soft affinity, that is when a OS try to keep a process on one processor, say this CPU, because of some policy, but cannot guarantee it will happen. But in hard affinity, when an OS has the ability to allow a process to specify that it is not to migrate to other processors, it will not migrate. So the process, if this is CPU 1 and this CPU 2, then the processor affinity, as we just said, migration of a process from the process to another processor, the process goes to another processor. This is avoided because, as we said, if it happens, then we have to see about the cost of invalidating the process because it is not running here, and we have to repopulate in this processor, that is processor cache. So soft affinity, when the OS try to keep a process on one processor, but it cannot guarantee that it is going to migrate, it will itself migrate to this second processor or not. But hard affinity, no, it will be here only, it will not migrate. Then load balancing. In the load balancing, as the name is suggesting by itself, it will keep the workload evenly distributed across all processor in symmetric multiprocessing. All the processor will have equal amount of jobs. So we have two migration approaches in this: push migration and pull migration. In push migration, a specific task will check the load of each processor and if it finds some imbalance, it will evenly distribute the load to less busy processors. Say there are three processors, this is heavily working and this is somewhat having low load. So the push migration will push the process from here to here. In the pull migration, the idle process pulls, it will by itself pull the waiting task from a busy processor. It will take the process from here and pull it to itself. And we have multi-core processor. It has some complicated scheduling issue, multi-core processor. Then we have algorithm evaluation. We can have deterministic modeling. We have queuing models and implementation. So in the algorithm evaluation, this deterministic modeling will take particular predetermined workload and then it defines the performance of each algorithm for that workload. This is deterministic modeling. So in this deterministic modeling, what is going on is a method takes a particular predetermined workload and then defines the performance of each algorithm for that workload. This is simple, this is fast, exact numbers, so algorithms now can be compared. But since it requires exact number of inputs, its answers apply only to those cases which we are talking about. So the main usage of this deterministic modeling is to describe the scheduling algorithm and then to provide example. If you are running same programs again and again, it's good. But if you have different examples, then the deterministic modeling may indicate some trends. So in general, this deterministic modeling is very specific, too specific, and it would require too much exact knowledge to be useful. In the queuing models, you can find the distribution of CPU and input-output burst. So there is a formula describing the probability of particular CPU burst, and the computer system is described as a network of servers by itself, and each server have a queue of some waiting processes. So knowing the arrival and the service rates of the processes, now we can compute various scheduling criteria, as we saw, compute the utilization, the throughput, average queue length, wait length, queuing network analysis. But the queuing analysis has certain limitations also. The algorithm that can be handled, they are limited, and the math, which is quite of complicated algorithm, can be sometimes hard to work with. And it's also required to make assumptions that may not be accurate sometime. So the computer result might not be so accurate. Then we can also have simulations. This involves programming a model to the computer system. That is, uh, we can have a model. So we can have a we can program a model for, say, some computer system. We can have data structure to represent the major components, and then we simulate. The simulator has a variable representing, say, some clock, and as this variable in value is increased, the simulator now modifies the system state to reflect the activities of devices, the process, and the scheduler. And as this simulation execute, now the statistics, the mathematics will indicate the algorithm performance. They are gathered and then they can be printed. So you can have a random number generator. This is programmed to generate the process, the CPU burst times according to the probability distributions, and the distribution may be defined either mathematically or just by previous knowledge, that is empirically. So if the distribution is to be defined empirically based on previous experiments, the measurement of the actual system under system are taken, and the results are used to define the actual distribution of events in the real system, and this distribution can then be used to derive the simulation. We can use the trace tapes to record the sequence of actual events, but there are certain disadvantages in simulation. It can be costly, it can require hours of computer time, and as we just introduced trace tapes, that can require a large amount of storage space, and the design, coding, and debugging of simulator itself can be a major task. In order to implement, the only completely accurate way to evaluate any scheduling algorithm is just to code it, put inside the operating system and see how it works. But again, the difficulty is the cost of this approach and the environment to which this algorithm is used if it changes. So this is all about the scheduling, CPU scheduling and the algorithms and what we can do with it. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.